I used to believe I could read people like open books. 20 years of teaching literature had trained me to spot foreshadowing, to dissect character motivations, to predict plot twists before they unfurled on the page. Yet somehow, I missed every sign in my own story. That Tuesday in April began like any other. Spring had finally wrestled winter into submission, and the cherry blossoms outside our brownstone were just beginning to flutter down in pale pink snow. James had already left for the office when I woke up, his side of the bed cold, his coffee mug rinsed and placed upside down on the dish rack. Always so meticulous, my husband. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when his iPad chimed with a notification. Without thinking, I glanced over. The message preview glowed on the screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. Hotel confirmed. The sender's name was listed simply as A. My hand froze mid-sentence on a student's essay about betrayal in Shakespearean tragedies. Irony has always had a cruel sense of humor. Perhaps I should have left it alone. Perhaps I should have respected his privacy, asked him about it later, given him the benefit of doubt that 15 years of marriage should have earned. But something, cold and certain, settled in my stomach. My fingers moved before my mind could protest. One touch, and his messages unfolded before me. "Wear that black dress I love," he'd written to her. "The one with the open back?" she'd replied. "Yes, the one that makes me forget my own name." Hundreds of messages stretched back months. Photos, plans, inside jokes, hotel receipts. They'd been to the restaurant where he'd proposed to me. They'd walked through Central Park on Christmas Eve while I'd waited at home, believing he was working late. The sheer volume of the deception was its own kind of violence. Her name was Amelia. Not A to protect her identity, but A because that's what he called her. Affectionate, intimate, a nickname wrapped in secrecy. She worked in his law firm, younger, of course, always younger. I found her on social media within minutes. Dark, hair, bright smile, a life meticulously curated in filtered photographs. In one, I could see my birthday gift to him, a vintage watch wrapped around her wrist as she held up a cocktail. I sat there for 3 hours, reading everything, memorizing, details like I was studying for the most important exam of my life. Occasionally, tears would blur my vision, and I'd wipe them away mechanically, not wanting to miss a single word of my undoing. At 2:17 p.m., I closed the iPad, walked calmly to the bathroom, and vomited until there was nothing left inside me. Then I showered, dressed, and applied makeup with methodical precision. I chose my most elegant black dress. Not the one he'd bought me, but one I'd purchased for myself years ago, before I started dressing to please him. When he came home that evening, kissing me on the cheek with lips that had surely kissed her. Hours before, I smiled. I poured him his favorite whiskey. I asked about his day with genuine curiosity, as if I was hearing about it for the first time, not the second. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, noticing the dress, the makeup, the careful arrangement of my hair. "Special occasion? Just felt like making an effort," I replied, raising my glass to his. "To new beginnings." He clinked his glass against mine, confusion flickering across his face before settling into appreciation. He had no idea that while we were toasting, I was already calculating the exact value of 15 years, what I would take with me, and what I would leave behind in ashes. For 2 weeks, I lived in limbo. Each morning, I'd wake up beside him, studying the peaceful lines of his sleeping face, searching for some visible mark of his duplicity. How could someone look so unchanged when they'd become a stranger? I'd trace the familiar constellation of freckles across his shoulders, wondering if she'd mapped them too, if she knew that the one near his collarbone was shaped like a tiny star. Sleep abandoned me. Food lost its taste. I moved through my days like a ghost haunting my own life. My students noticed. Of course they did. Teenagers possess a preternatural ability to sense when adults are unraveling. "Are you okay, Mrs. Bennet?" they'd ask. And I'd smile tightly, redirect their attention to Gatsby's green light or Sylvia Plath's imagery. Literature suddenly felt too close, too raw. Every betrayal on the page a reflection of my own. The nights were worst. James would return home late, trailing excuses and the faint scent of her perfume. I'd pretend to be asleep while he showered, washing away the evidence. Sometimes he'd slide into bed and reach for me, and I'd either yield mechanically or feign exhaustion. Both options felt like different varieties of self-betrayal. "You seem distant lately," he said one evening over dinner. A dinner I'd cooked while imagining various scenarios of confrontation, each more devastating than the last. "Do I?" I pushed pasta around my plate. "I suppose I've been thinking a lot." "About what?" His voice held genuine concern. The audacity of that concern made something crack inside me. "About how people can become such accomplished liars." I looked directly into his eyes then. "It's fascinating, really. The human capacity for deception." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "That's an interesting topic." "Isn't it, though? My students are reading The Crucible right now. All those secrets and lies, all that damage." I took a sip of wine. "Tell me, James, do you think John Proctor was right to confess in the end, or should he have maintained his lie?" "I think..." He hesitated, suddenly on unstable ground. "He did what he thought was right for his conscience." "His conscience," I repeated softly. What a luxury. I began noticing things I'd overlooked before. How he always placed his phone face down. How he'd changed his passwords. How he never talked about his colleagues anymore. The pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving fell into terrible alignment. One Saturday, he said he needed to go to the office. An emergency with a client. I nodded, kissed him goodbye, and then followed him in a taxi. Not to his firm's gleaming skyscraper, but to a boutique hotel in Greenwich Village. I watched him check in, watched him check his watch, watched him disappear inside. I didn't need to see more. That evening, I called my sister Caroline in Boston. The moment she answered, my carefully constructed composure crumbled. "He's having an affair?" I said, the words still alien on my tongue. "Oh, Emma." Her voice softened with a sadness that matched my own. "I'm so sorry. What are you going to do?" What was I going to do? The question echoed in the empty spaces of our apartment. I looked at our wedding photo on the mantel, younger versions of ourselves, radiant with a certainty that now seemed naive. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I won't be the woman who didn't know, not anymore." That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time. When James asked why, I told him I had papers to grade and didn't want to disturb him. Another small lie in a house now built of them. As I stared at the unfamiliar shadows on an unfamiliar ceiling, I realized I was already practicing for a life without him beside me. March slipped into April, and I continued my silent vigil. Friends commented on my weight loss, the shadows beneath my eyes. "Just end-of-term stress," I'd explain with a wave of my hand. Meanwhile, I was methodically preparing for a different kind of ending. I opened a separate bank account. I consulted a divorce attorney during my lunch breaks, a kind-eyed woman named Diane who listened without judgment as I laid out the skeletal remains of my marriage. I sorted through our shared possessions in my mind, mentally cataloging what mattered and what I could leave behind. The pearl earrings he'd given me for our 10th anniversary. The first edition Austen we'd found in that little bookshop in London. The memories embedded in every corner of our home like stubborn stains. "You haven't confronted him yet," Diane asked during our second meeting, surprise evident in her voice. Not yet. I twisted my wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd developed. I need to be prepared first. The truth was more complicated. Part of me was waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. A confession? An epiphany? Some moment of clarity that would make the path forward obvious and undeniable. Another part was simply afraid. Confrontation would make it real, would transform suspicion into certainty, would force action when inaction had become a perverse comfort. So we continued our charade. James would kiss me goodbye in the mornings, and I'd smile as if I didn't know where those lips had been. We'd discuss mundane things, bills, dinner plans, the leak in the upstairs bathroom. Sometimes, in these ordinary moments, doubt would creep in. Perhaps I was mistaken. Perhaps there was an explanation. Perhaps 15 years couldn't end like this, with whispered lies and hotel receipts. Then he'd receive a text and step out of the room to answer it, and reality would crash back like a wave. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, I found a long, dark hair on his jacket, not mine. I held it up to the light, this physical evidence of her existence, this tangible proof of what I already knew. Such a small thing to carry such weight. Is everything all right? James appeared in the doorway, watching me with that careful expression he'd adopted lately. I let the hair fall from my fingers. Fine. Just thinking about tomorrow's faculty meeting. The lie came easily now, a learned language. He nodded, seemingly relieved by this ordinary explanation. As he turned to leave, a sudden impulse seized me. James? He paused, looking back. Yes? Are you happy? With us, I mean. The question hung between us, deceptively simple. I watched emotions flicker across his face. Surprise, unease, calculation, and finally, a carefully constructed sincerity. Of course I am. He stepped toward me, took my hands in his. Why would you ask that? I searched his eyes. These eyes I'd gazed into countless times across dinner tables, movie theaters, our marriage bed. I knew every fleck in his irises, every crease at the corners. When had they become so unreadable to me? Just checking, I said softly. Sometimes people change without realizing it. He kissed my forehead, a gesture both tender and distant. Not us, Emma. We're solid. The ease of his deception was almost impressive. Almost. That night, as he slept beside me, I made my decision. I wouldn't confront him yet. I wouldn't demand explanations or apologies. I wouldn't throw plates or scream or fall apart as he perhaps expected I might. Instead, I would dismantle our life together with the same careful precision he'd used to betray it. This silent agreement I made with myself felt like the first autonomous choice I'd made in months. In the darkness, I finally recognized the emotion that had been growing beneath my grief and shock. A cold, clarifying anger. Not the destructive kind that burns everything in its path, but the transformative kind that forges something new from the ruins. By morning, I had a plan. Not for vengeance or public humiliation, but for reclamation. Of my dignity. Of my future. Of myself. I've always loved theater, the precision of it, the way actors hit their marks, deliver their lines, create the illusion of spontaneity while following a carefully crafted script. For the next 3 weeks, our marriage became my production, and I directed every scene with meticulous attention to detail. I started leaving subtle breadcrumbs for James to find. A business card from Diane's law office, casually left on the kitchen counter. Browser history showing searches for apartments in Brooklyn Heights. A notebook with lists of our shared assets, left half hidden beneath a magazine. I wanted him to sense something shifting without being able to name it. to feel the ground beneath him turn uncertain, just as he had done to me. Our anniversary fell during this time, 15 years. He brought home roses and champagne, his guilt manifesting as extravagance. I accepted both with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. 15 years, he mused, clinking his glass against mine. Who would have thought we'd make it this far? Indeed, I said. Who would have thought? That night, he tried to make love to me. I allowed it, clinically observing his familiar movements, noting how he closed his eyes at certain moments. Was he picturing her? The thought should have devastated me, but I felt strangely removed, as if watching two strangers perform an intimate scene on stage. The following Monday, I withdrew half of our savings, my lawful share, Diane had assured me, and deposited it into my new account. On Tuesday, I signed a 6-month lease on a small but sun-filled apartment near my school. On Wednesday, I began quietly moving essential items when James was at work. Winter clothes, favorite books, family photographs, heirlooms from my grandmother. Nothing he would immediately notice, but everything I couldn't bear to leave behind. The performance continued at faculty gatherings, dinner with friends, even his firm's spring gala, where I smiled and charmed and played the devoted wife while scanning the room for Amelia. I spotted her across the dance floor, younger than I'd expected, nervously fidgeting with her necklace whenever James was near. Not the predatory temptress I'd imagined, but a woman clearly out of her depth, playing at games with real-world consequences. Our eyes met briefly. Something passed between us. Recognition, perhaps. She excused herself moments later, disappearing to the ladies' room for the remainder of the evening. James noticed nothing, too absorbed in maintaining his own performance. As May approached, bringing with it final exams and the promise of summer, I felt a curious sense of calm settling over me. The initial shock had hardened into resolve. The pain had sharpened into purpose. I was no longer the woman who had sobbed on the bathroom floor. I was someone new. Someone stronger, colder, and infinitely more dangerous to the careful construction of lies James had built. "You seem different lately," he commented one evening as we prepared for bed. His tone was casual, but his eyes were watchful. "Do I?" I removed my earrings, the pearls he'd given me, which would stay behind when I left. "How so?" "I don't know. More distant, maybe." He paused, choosing his words. "Is everything okay with us, Emma?" I turned to face him. This man I'd loved for nearly half my life. This stranger who shared my bed. "Why don't you tell me, James? Is everything okay with us?" The question hung between us like a gauntlet thrown. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might confess. I saw the consideration flash across his face, the weighing of truth against comfort, of relief against consequences. "Of course," he said finally, retreating behind his practiced smile. "I just want to make sure you're happy." "Happiness is overrated," I replied, turning back to the mirror. "I prefer clarity these days." The confusion on his face was almost worth the pain of the past months. Almost. The following day, I finalized my plans. Our production was reaching its final act, and I wanted the ending to be memorable. James had always been fond of grand gestures, his proposal atop the Empire State Building, surprise weekend getaways, elaborate anniversary celebrations. It seemed only fitting that the dissolution of our marriage should be equally dramatic. I circled a date on our kitchen calendar, May 17th. Our anniversary dinner at Le Bernardin, his favorite restaurant, where he'd insisted on making reservations months ago. It would be the perfect setting for the final scene. The day arrived with perfect spring weather, clear skies, gentle breeze, cherry blossoms in full bloom. I spent the morning grading final exams, my red pen slashing through incorrect answers, with perhaps more vigor than necessary. At noon, I visited my new apartment, arranging the few pieces of furniture I'd purchased, hanging curtains, filling the refrigerator, a blank canvas waiting for its first brush strokes. I'd booked a salon appointment for 3 o'clock, something I rarely did, which made James raise an eyebrow when I mentioned it that morning. "Special occasion?" he asked. His coffee mug paused, midway to his lips. "You could say that," I replied. 15 years deserves some effort, don't you think? At the salon, I asked for something dramatic. The stylist took inches off my always long hair, added layers, suggested highlights that brightened my face. As I watched my transformation in the mirror, I thought about rebirth, about shedding old skins, about emerging new from the chrysalis of betrayal. I chose a dress I'd purchased the week before, midnight blue, fitted but not tight, with an open back that ended just above the curve of my spine. Not my usual style, but then again, I wasn't my usual self anymore. I paired it with silver heels and the sapphire earrings my sister had given me for my 40th birthday, not James's pearls. Never again his pearls. When I stepped into the living room, James's expression was worth every penny spent on the transformation. Surprise, appreciation, and something like regret flickered across his face. "Emma," he breathed. "You look incredible." "Thank you." I accepted the compliment with a small smile. "Shall we? Our reservation is at 7. The restaurant was everything I remembered. Elegant, intimate, filled with the soft murmur of expensive conversations. We were seated at a corner table with a view of the city lights beginning to glimmer as dusk fell. James ordered champagne, an extravagant vintage. When it arrived, he raised his glass. "To 15 remarkable years," he said, "and to many more." I clinked my glass against his, holding his gaze. "To truth," I countered, "and consequences." Flicker of unease crossed his face, but he recovered quickly, turning the conversation to safer topics. My students, his recent cases, plans for the summer that would never materialize. I participated just enough to maintain the illusion of normalcy, watching him perform his role of devoted husband with what now seemed like transparent artifice. Between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to the ladies' room. There, I stood before the mirror, rehearsing the words I'd practiced countless times. When I returned to the table, our dessert had arrived, chocolate soufflé, his favorite. I waited until he'd taken his first bite before I spoke. "I know about Amelia." The words fell between us like stones into still water. James froze, spoon suspended midway to his mouth, eyes darting to mine. "I don't," he began, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Please don't insult me by lying." "Not anymore." My voice was steady, controlled. "I've known for months. The hotel in Greenwich Village, the weekend in Boston when you were supposedly at a conference, the texts, the photos, all of it." He set down his spoon, his face draining of color. Around us, diners continued their meals, oblivious to the implosion happening at our table. "Emma, I can explain." "Can you? Can you really explain lying to my face for months? Sleeping with her in our bed? Using my birthday gift to you as a present for her?" I leaned forward, my voice low but intense. "I'm not interested in explanations, James. I'm here to inform you of decisions already made." I reached into my clutch and removed 3 items: a key, a business card, and a folded document. "This is the key to my new apartment. This is the contact information for my attorney. And this," I slid the document toward him, "is a list of terms for our divorce. You'll find them quite generous considering the circumstances." He stared at the items as if they might bite him. "You can't be serious. We can work through this. Couples therapy, a fresh start." I've already had my fresh start. I gestured to my hair, my dress, myself. This dinner isn't a celebration, James. It's a eulogy. His face contorted with a mixture of shock, guilt, and dawning comprehension. You planned this, all of it. I learned from the best. I smiled, without warmth. You've been orchestrating your double life for months. I simply composed my exit. I stood, gathering my clutch. I won't be coming home tonight, or any night. My things are already moved. The papers will arrive tomorrow. Sign them, and we can avoid making this any more painful than it needs to be. He reached for my wrist. Emma, please. I pulled away gently but firmly. Goodbye, James. Enjoy the rest of your soufflé. I've already taken care of the bill. As I walked through the restaurant, past tables of couples and families and friends, sharing meals and moments, a strange lightness filled me. Not happiness, that would come later, but liberation. The heavy mantle of deception and pretense slipped from my shoulders with each step toward the door. Outside, the night air caressed my bare shoulders. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the city pulse around me, alive, with possibilities, with futures I hadn't yet imagined. Then I hailed a taxi and gave the driver my new address. The calls began before I'd even reached my new apartment. I silenced my phone, watching his name flash across the screen again and again as the taxi navigated the late evening traffic. By morning, there were 17 missed calls, 5 voicemails, and a dozen text messages ranging from apologetic to desperate to angry. I deleted them all without listening or reading. The time for his words had passed. My new apartment felt both foreign and welcoming that first night, like a borrowed dress that somehow fits perfectly. I walked through the rooms, touching furniture I'd chosen myself, looking out windows that framed unfamiliar views. The silence wrapped around me, not the stifling silence of secrets, but the peaceful quiet of solitude. I slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. The summer unfolded in unexpected ways. James fought the divorce initially, alternating between remorse and resentment. He showed up at my school, sent elaborate flower arrangements, enlisted mutual friends to plead his case. I remained unmoved. Eventually, when he realized I wouldn't be manipulated or cajoled, he signed the papers. The divorce was finalized in August, efficient, almost anticlimactic after the drama that preceded it. Amelia reached out once, a handwritten letter that arrived at my new address. I wondered briefly how she'd found me, then realized it didn't matter. Her words were what one might expect. Apologies, explanations, justifications wrapped in remorse. She was 29, she wrote. She hadn't known how serious it was until it was too late. She'd never meant to hurt anyone. I read the letter once, then set it aflame in my kitchen sink, watching the edges curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Was that cathartic? My sister asked when I told her what I'd done. She'd come to stay with me for a week, helping me settle into my new life with practical, sisterly efficiency. Not really, I admitted. It didn't make me feel anything at all. And that was the truth. Where anger and pain had once consumed me, there was now a curious neutrality. Not forgiveness. I wasn't that evolved. But indifference. They had become characters in a story I no longer needed to tell. When school resumed in September, I returned with a new title. Newly single, newly independent, newly myself. My colleagues were kind, if awkward. My students, perceptive as ever, noticed the change in me, but respected the boundaries of appropriate curiosity. One senior girl lingered after class one day, nervously clutching her copy of Jane Eyre. Mrs. Bennet, she began, then corrected herself. I mean, Ms. Bennet now, right? Either is fine, Lily, I assured her. I just wanted to say, you seem happier. This year, I mean. She flushed slightly. That probably sounds weird. I smiled, touched by her observation. Not weird at all. And thank you. Was I happier? The question followed me home that evening. I considered it as I prepared dinner for one, as I graded papers at my small dining table, as I stretched out on my couch with a glass of wine and a novel I was reading purely for pleasure. Happiness seemed too simple a word for the complex state I'd achieved. I was present, authentic, uncompromised. As autumn painted the city in amber and crimson, I began to recognize a woman I'd forgotten. The Emma who existed before James, before compromise, before I'd subsumed my edges to fit within the confines of our marriage. She liked spicy food that James had always found too intense. She stayed up reading until 3 a.m. when a book captivated her. She signed up for a weekend writing workshop and spent Sundays at obscure art galleries in Chelsea. Friends worried I was lonely. They arranged dinner parties with carefully invited single men, suggested online dating profiles, reminded me that 50 was still young. I declined politely but firmly. This solitude wasn't a waiting room for my next relationship. It was a garden I was cultivating with intent. But don't you miss being with someone? My friend Diana asked over lunch, her wedding ring catching the light as she gestured. The companionship? I considered the question seriously. I miss the idea of it sometimes, the good parts. But I don't miss wondering who's really sharing my bed. I don't miss compromising my truth to maintain an illusion. In December, I received a holiday card from James, a peace offering perhaps, or an attempt to assuage his lingering guilt. A handwritten note mentioned he'd moved to Chicago for a new position. I felt nothing but a distant wish for his well-being, the kind one might feel for a character in a book whose story has taken a turn toward redemption. That evening, I stood before my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection as snowflakes drifted past my window. The woman who gazed back at me was both familiar and new, silver threading through her shorter hair, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a certainty in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "There you are," I whispered to her. "Welcome back." She smiled, this woman I was becoming. In her eyes, I saw not an ending, but a beginning, a story still unfolding, chapters yet to be written, blank pages awaiting my hand.